I really feel like it was one of those Wayne's World moments where it was like the security guard that has too much information. Anyways, that was amazing. I'm so thankful that I ran into him. I'm Jessica, the Museum Guide, and today I'm at Golders Green Crematorium, the final resting place of people like Keith Moon, Marc Bolan, Bram Stoker, and Sigmund Freud, to take you on a tour of the fascinating history of cremation in Britain and this beautiful place of rest. We're going to dive deep into the history of this place, but for now you just need to know that it opened in 1902, at a time when the Victorians were just getting over their fear of cremation, and it was becoming legal in this country. Before that time, it was a legal grey area, and of course people were always a little bit afraid that someone could get cremated while they were still alive. However, it quickly caught on in popularity, and now Golders Green is the largest crematorium in London in terms of the number of services. A beautiful place of rest and a popular tourist attraction as well. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm delighted that you're here, and I hope that you'll stay to enjoy even more of my meticulously researched tours of museums, heritage sites, oddities, and cemeteries. If you're a regular viewer, you might be interested in checking out my Patreon. There, I release at least one extra video tour every month, and you'll also have access to my archives. I've put a special spring discount on right now, so head over there and check it out. Didn't make an appointment in advance to see the East Columbarium. That's where Sigmund Freud, Anna Pavlova, and Bram Stoker are. And I was feeling so sad. I was just going to have to show you guys some pictures, but a lovely maintenance man just asked me who I was looking for. And when I told him that I was going to have to come back sometime in the future, he offered to let me in right now without an appointment. Yippee!
Moonfang comes over for 2 weeks and just...
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you. We're going to talk about the history of cremation in the UK and Golders Green Crematorium in general, but I suppose now it's a good time to just talk briefly about the 3 columbaria that are here at the site. Now, what is a columbarium? It's a dedicated above-ground structure that you'll often find in a cemetery, church, or a crematorium, a place where you can store urns that contain cremains or cremated remains in niches. Here at Golders Green, there are 3 columbaria. The first is the Ernest George Columbarium, one of the earliest buildings erected on the site back in 1902. Here is the Hall of Memory, which was completed in 1916 and features 3 different levels of niches. We'll come back to that one a little bit later on. And finally, this one here, the East Columbarium, built in between the two in 1911. The lovely chap who was showing me around referred to it as the Tower because it has 5 levels. The East Columbarium used to be open to the public without an appointment, but a series of thefts at Golders Green has caused them to keep it locked up. I'll tell you more about those, but let's head into the Ernest George Columbarium. Is it Anna Pavlova? Thank you very much. Anna Pavlova, the Russian prima ballerina. She was the principal dancer of the Imperial Russian Ballet, and she's most recognized for creating the role of the Dying Swan. She was the first ballerina to tour the world, including India, Australia, Mexico, and South America, with her own company. Just look at her. She was absolutely wonderful, sadly dying of pleurisy in Paris, just a few days short of her 50th birthday. Her original ballet shoes have since been stolen. These are a new pair that have been placed here. Just horrible. There was a lot of controversy surrounding Pavlova's ashes, and the Moscow mayor Yuri Luzhnov wanted to have them flown to Moscow for interment in the cemetery there, based on claims that it was her dying wish that her ashes be returned to Russia following the fall of the Soviet Union. These claims were later found to be false, and her ashes remain here in London. We're staying in the Ernest George Columbarium to go and visit its other most famous inhabitant. Yes, this is called Freud Corner, and here you can see the plinth upon which an urn sits, containing the ashes of Sigmund Freud and his wife Martha. Of course, Freud is a household name. He was an Austrian psychologist who went on to pioneer a form of talk therapy called psychoanalysis. And he established a very successful practice in Vienna. However, in 1938, after the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany, Freud fled to London, where he lived for the rest of his life. It's not just Sigmund and Martha that are here either. There are many members of the Freud family, including his daughter, also a noted psychologist in the field of child psychology, Anna Freud. Freud's urn is very unusual. If you have a look at it, it's an ancient Greek cup called a crater. This is one of 2,200 antiquities that he owned, and this particular Greek urn was given to him by Princess Marie Bonaparte, yes, one of Napoleon's granddaughters. It's kind of a mystery why this was chosen as his urn, because there seems to be no record of it in his will. However, this was the site of a dastardly crime. On New Year's Day in 2014, thieves entered into the columbarium and tried to steal the urn and maybe even the plinth. The urn was badly cracked and damaged. It's since been repaired, and Freud's monument now sits encased with glass, and there's even tighter security around who can visit. As I mentioned, I was very lucky to get access. Some might say I have some horseshoes you know where. One of the highlights of my Highgate Cemetery tour was, of course, seeing the famous grave of Marx. Karl Marx, that is, but here's a different Marx, a very different one. This is Simon Marx, born the son of an illiterate Russian immigrant in Leeds in 1888. Simon Marx helped to transform the chain of penny bazaars that his father and his father's partner, Tom Spencer, had started into the incredibly successful Marks and Spencer, or M&S, that we know and love today. Now we're heading over into the East Columbarium, which my host informs me has a colony of bats. How perfect is that for our next resident? For yes, this is the final resting place of Bram Stoker. Despite being here in London, Bram Stoker was an Irish writer, barrister, and theatre manager, and of course he was the author of Dracula in 1897. Drawing on lots of other literary influences, including John Polidori's The Vampire, to create the fictional character Count Dracula. Bram Stoker's Dracula is considered a landmark milestone in Gothic literature, and it still continues to inspire us to this day. After suffering from a number of strokes, Stoker actually died quite young at the age of 64 in 1912. Some people say he died due to overwork, but other people say he died of tertiary syphilis. There is another fascinating interment here. These are the ashes of Tyrrell William Cavendish and his wife Julia Florence Cavendish. They were first-class travelers on the Titanic, and sadly he perished in the tragedy. She survived and later died in 1963, though she never remarried. Their ashes are contained here within an ornate copper urn, and you can see their memorial inscription mentions the Titanic disaster. From a few different accounts that I read, Cavendish helped a load of women and children into the lifeboats, which really makes me think highly of him. There is another Titanic survivor here at Golders Green, Edith Rosenbaum. She later on went on to become a fashion reporter and a stylist. You can see she's quite snazzy here. But she was rescued from the Titanic with an unusual artifact. Her toy pig. You can see she's pictured with it here. And this pig is actually held by the National Maritime Museum. I absolutely have to go and see it. His name is Lucky, and it's actually a musical toy. Edith used this musical toy pig to entertain the children on the lifeboat and prevent them from being too scared. And throughout the rest of her life, she would appear on television and bring along the pig with her. She was cremated here in 1975, but has no visible memorial. But here's another one of those names that takes me back to my undergrad, Karl Mannheim, who was one of the pioneers of the sociology of knowledge. I actually think I learned about him probably around the same time of learning of some of Freud's theories, so it's quite fitting that they're so close together. We're heading now into the third and final columbarium that we're going to visit today, the Hall of Memory, this one built in 1916. Here's the urn of Russian pianist Galina Maximova. It's really fascinating to see all of the different faiths represented here as well. The air is extremely perfumed with flowers, and you can see with different Chinese memorials that fruits and candies, incense have been left. I'm actually really surprised at the number of available niches here. And here's some of the family members of Thomas Crapper, the man who invented the valve that we use in the flush toilet that prevents our toilets from exploding. Believe it or not, that word had been in use to mean number two all the way back since the medieval period, and he chose to go into that profession anyway. These are the different people who've been cremated here on 20th of April in different years. Fascinating. I really feel like it was one of those Wayne's World moments where it was like the security guard that has too much information. Anyways, that was amazing. I'm so thankful that I ran into him. There are obviously thousands, tens of thousands of people that are interred here in perpetuity, but there are also a lot of people that have been cremated here and had their ashes taken somewhere else. It is incredibly huge here. It is a really large space, and as you can probably tell, I pretty much have it to myself right now. There is a service taking place really far away. I mean, this is the size of, I don't know why I'm pretending like I know how big a football field is, but it's a lot of football fields. There's a service taking place quite far away from me, but as far as you can see around me, there's nobody here. It's a place of quiet and peaceful contemplation. And we're going to have a good look around. Now, Golders Green Crematorium was constructed in 1902. This was at a time that more and more people were just starting to make the choice to be cremated instead of buried in the ground. Today, about 80% of British people choose cremation. I found this really shocking when I moved here to the UK because in Canada and the US, it's about 50-50. We have a lot more space for burials, right? We have huge cemeteries that have lots of space to be expanded. However, over the last 120 years or so, cremation has become the far more popular choice here in the country, but it wasn't always that way. Prior to 1900, less than 1% of British people were cremated, and in fact, the legalities were in a little bit of a gray area. Obviously, people have been cremating their dead, their loved ones, for as long as there have been people. We know the Romans cremated their dead. We know ancient Anglo-Saxons cremated their dead, and so many other cultures. And in many cultures to this day, it's still the preferred form of dealing with your loved one after they die. For instance, if you think of Hinduism, cremation is the standard, and the famous cremation ghats in Varanasi or in Pashupatinath in Kathmandu can attest to that. Those have become tourist attractions in their own right as well. I've been to both. And as I mentioned, the Anglo-Saxons did often cremate their dead. There's cinerary urns in the British Museum and in a lot of other regional museums in the country, and they continue to be found in archaeological digs. However, by the medieval period, British Christians were unsure about what God would say about cremation, and clerics and religious scholars said that the practice was anti-Christian. Remember, we talked a little bit about this in my video on the charnel house at Spitalfields. The idea that at Judgment Day you had to have your long bones and your skull present so that you could walk and be judged in order to ascend to heaven for the afterlife. The belief was that if you were cremated, you wouldn't be able to reanimate those ashes, and therefore you might be stuck in limbo for all of eternity, which was a terrifying idea, especially if you had lost a child or your parent. You want the best for them in the afterlife. And so cremation was a complete no-go. It wasn't exactly illegal, but there was no law saying that it was legal. So it was, as I said, in a legal limbo. And a lot of people weren't really willing to test it out to see what would happen, even though there were some people in the 19th century who did want cremation. They weren't willing to be the first people to potentially be tried in a criminal court for doing so. Of course, that all started to change. You've got to remember 1870s, 1860s, London's graveyards, and even the Magnificent Seven cemeteries began to become overcrowded cesspits. That's more the graveyards. The big cemeteries were still being well taken care of at that point. But Queen Victoria's influential physician, Dr. Henry Thompson in 1874 published a very influential paper called On the Treatment of the Body After Death, where he argued that cremation was a far more civilized and sanitary option for London's dead, and dead all over the country. He set up the Crematorium Society of England in that same year, 1874, and began campaigning for cremation to be recognized formally in law. Thompson's society then went forward and built the country's first dedicated crematorium in Woking. We visited Brookwood Cemetery in one of my videos on YouTube, and that was opened in 1878. Here's an illustration of the cremator before the chapels and the buildings were constructed. But that cremator wouldn't get put into use for a little while. The following year, the first body to be cremated was a horse, and actually this enraged the local community. They felt like they were being made a mockery of. This kind of sacrilegious, mocking ceremony was taking place. So they needed a human person to be the first person to try it out and test the new laws. It wasn't obviously the deceased who was going to run the risk of punishment. It was their loved ones and the people responsible for the actual cremation. In 1884, a court case ruled that cremation was still a legal gray area. They said, again, it's not legal, but it's not illegal either. And so basically the Cremation Society needed somebody to give it a try, and the first person to do so was a woman in Woking. Her name was Jeanette Peckerskill, and she was cremated quasi-legally, the first person in the country to test the new ruling. By the way, she was really interesting in her own right, having published a book of poems called Tales from the Harem and exhibiting at the Royal Academy. The protests did continue in that area, but also public support was starting to increase as well. Mainly people who were really convinced by the ideas of modernity and science and technology and kind of saying goodbye to the old, more traditional ways of burial. They wanted a technological solution for the unpleasant nature of overcrowded cemeteries, and we've talked about that at length on my channel. You might remember in my video on Highgate Cemetery, there's a very, very small columbarium, because when that cemetery was created in the 1840s, almost nobody was being cremated. But by 1900, I mean, just look around. There was need for these vast, vast spaces. So within the space of 25 years, cremation came much more into fashion and demand. In 1900, 424 people were cremated in all of Britain, but that was up 50 from the decade before, so it was slowly increasing. 1902, Golders Green opened here in Hampstead, just west of London. Now, today, obviously, it is London, but it was chosen then because it was a convenient location, but it was far enough outside the kind of bounds of the crowded city that it wouldn't offend. They hired architect Ernest George to design the crematorium because they, quote, believed he could command the confidence of the public. Remember, this was still very controversial, and so having somebody staid and trusted could help to further the cause. Later, when George passed away, he became his own customer, and he was cremated and interred here. It was the first to open in London and the 7th to open in the entire country. It wasn't immediately popular, but later on that same year, a new law was passed that allowed all local authorities in the country to open up their own crematoriums. Now, as I mentioned, it was open in 1902, but it would continue to be constructed for the next 40 years. A series of different chapels and buildings, and of course, this Grade 1 listed garden that we're going to walk around. It's absolutely beautiful. All of these different covered archways and walkways. It's a stunning place, and I can really imagine finding comfort here coming to visit a loved one. The kind of architecture that we can see is a Romanesque style with these rounded arches, different than the pointed arches of the Gothic style that was more typically popular in the 19th century. So we're first meant to walk through the covered arches and pay our respects to the different memorial plaques, and then spend time in the gardens, which are regarded as a living memorial. The gardens were designed by William Robinson, and Golders Green was the first crematorium in the country to have this beautiful purpose-designed landscape for us to enjoy. Remember, Henry Thompson, the physician of Queen Victoria's who campaigned for crematoriums, he was one of the first people to be cremated here in 1904. Here's his bust. Kind of Art Nouveau inspired memorial here for the Watkins family. Really beautiful. This beautiful little almost like a Roman cinerary urn, William Henry Arthur Judd and his wife Nellie Annie. You see a lot of Dorises, Ethels, and Ediths. Memorials straight ahead for World War I and World War II. And you can just see just how vast the building actually is. It's a very long Italian Romanesque style building. Lots of terracotta tile. It looks like it would be right at home somewhere in Umbria, but here it is in North London. Golders Green is synonymous with London's historically Orthodox Jewish population, and there is actually a Jewish cemetery directly across the street from Golders Green Crematorium. It's called the Hoop Lane, or London Jewish Cemetery. It's just such a beautiful and peaceful place. I hope that that's being conveyed through the camera. Wow, this is quite a monument. This big bronze statue here of Ghanshyam das Birla, an Indian businessman who died in 1983, a member of the Birla business and politics family in India. And you can see he's at a distance here, has a really beautiful view across the lawns and over towards the main buildings. The rose beds are named after poets. They're not cremated here, but the Tennyson bed here and the Blake bed there. I guess in addition to having a memorial plaque or your ashes interned in the columbarium, you can also have a rose bush or other kind of flower plant planted in your loved one's memory. I just keep catching glimpses of the buildings in the distance. It really feels like I'm in some medieval monastery in Italy. Oh, and here, look at this, is fascinating. This tree was planted in 2024 to mark the 150th anniversary of the Cremation Society of Great Britain. Remember, we just talked about that they were formed in 1884. Just so many memorial plaques. Oh, what a beautiful statue. It says, Into the Silent Land by Henry Pegram, Royal Academy, presented by the Royal Academy of Arts in 1937. Beautiful. Actually, from the far distance, it almost had a look of a Grim Reaper type figure, but you can see it's a lot more beautiful and poetic up close. Normally I have an urge to, narrate every little thing, so I hope you'll forgive me that for some of this I'm just silent. It is really a contemplative place. It's quite an interesting kind of brutalist mausoleum here, locked up. Yeah, very interesting structure. This is the Philipson Mausoleum, built in 1914 to 1915. I really thought this was kind of brutalist at first glance, but it's actually kind of between Art Nouveau and Art Deco. It was designed by Sir Edward Landseer Lutyens, and it's made of Portland stone with bronze doors. Funny, I assumed that it was concrete, but it is actually Portland stone. When you look inside, you can see two urns on the plinth. These belong to Ralph Hilton Philipson and his wife Florence. She died very young, and even though he later remarried to a woman named Maya, he chose to have his ashes placed here on the plinth with his first wife. Hopefully Maya wasn't too hurt by that. By the way, this kind of lattice work, this is also Portland stone. When I was looking at it, I wondered if it was concrete. And apparently, beautiful roses were meant to grow in between the building and this lattice fence. It would be beautiful to see that. And here's the Rosebush Memorial to comedian and actor Peter Sellers, who died in 1980. He's most known for his role as Chief Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther series. That's what I know him from. There is a memorial plaque to Marc Bolan somewhere inside the columbarium, and I'm going to go try and find it in a few minutes. But before I do, I wanted to show you his memorial bench, which is where most people come to visit when they want to pay their respects to the late T-Rex singer who tragically died in a car accident. This is the Marc Bolan Memorial Bench. You can see it says Born to Boogie, Always in Our Hearts, who died September 16th, 1977. Obviously, he was a huge pioneer in the glam rock genre and tragically died in a car crash in Barnes in southwest London. There is actually a stone memorial and bronze bust there. I've never been. And actually, I just noticed this detail. You can see it says Rex, but then look, the top of the bench is a swan. Just across the garden path. Marc Bolan rests underneath this white rose bush with his parents. They chose a white rose for his song, Ride the White Swan. All right, so we've already seen the Marc Bolan Memorial Bench, but let's go look for his memorial plaque, as well as the memorial plaque for Keith Moon. He was the drummer for The Who, known almost as much for his self-destructive and crazy party behavior as much as he was for his drumming ability, and he died in 1978 and was cremated and interred here. To find these plaques, as well as a lot of others, we're going to go into the area called Musician's Corner. It's just down this hall. Okay, so you can see there's the two different memorial plaques to Marc Bolan. And then here is the memorial plaque to Keith Moon, straight ahead, right? And Keith Moon's ashes were spread across the lawns. David Gest, some of you might remember. But do you remember that weird period, like after he divorced Liza Minnelli, and he started dressing like, hey, fellow young people, and started like hanging out in Camden Town with Amy Winehouse? That was weird. Anyway, there's his memorial. Bernie Winters and Bud Flanagan, famous comedians. Bud Flanagan was a beloved British music hall entertainer, singer, and comedian, and he usually performed as half of the double act Flanagan and Allen, along with Chesney Allen. They were incredibly popular in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, raising spirits amongst the troops and the general public during World War II. Ronnie Scott, the famous saxophonist, he was also a session musician. He played saxophone on the Beatles' Lady Madonna and loads of other songs. But most famously, he went on to open Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in Soho, which is a brilliant place to go and visit if you're ever in town and looking for live music. Here's the memorial for Tubby Hayes, who was an English jazz legend, also known for the tenor saxophone and for performing in jazz groups with fellow sax player Ronnie Scott. It's quite fitting that they're here together. There are also a lot of actors here in Musician's Corner, including Dame Barbara Windsor. She was an English actress who is best known for her roles in the Carry On films and also for playing Peggy Mitchell in the BBC soap opera EastEnders. She didn't pass away that long ago, actually, only in 2020, and a year later her family, including her husband Scott Mitchell, erected this plaque and scattered her ashes here. Funnily enough, one of her Carry On co-stars, Sid James, the South African British actor, was also cremated here at Golders Green, though he doesn't have a visible memorial here. In her autobiography, Barbara Windsor revealed that she and Sid James had had a 3-year affair, so it's quite fitting that they're here together. This is the Jewish Memorial Chapel, and you can see a memorial plaque here for Marc Bolan on the 30-year anniversary of his death. And as I mentioned, many different faith traditions here. A small Hindu shrine for adherents of that faith. Let's just run through a quick list of people that were cremated here, but whose ashes are interred other places. And of course, I'm not going to get to all of them. British novelist Kingsley Amis was cremated here. He's best known for his satirical novels Lucky Jim and The Old Devils, and was knighted shortly before his death. He's in St. Pancras and Islington Cemetery. Famously, Amy Winehouse was cremated here, but her gravesite is in Edgeworbury Cemetery, which is not too far away from here in North London. Boris Anrep, who you might remember from the strange mosaic tiles in the National Gallery. I put that in my Strangest National Gallery video. He was cremated here as well, but his ashes were taken away by his family. Irish poet, writer, and polemicist George Bernard Shaw, who preferred to just be called Bernard Shaw, he was cremated here, though his ashes are at his home, Shaw's Corner, in Hertfordshire, Welwyn. He's probably most famous for writing Pygmalion. Beloved children's author Enid Blyton who's most famous for The Famous Five books, she was cremated here and her ashes spread across the lawn. To my knowledge, she doesn't have a memorial plaque here, which I find really unusual. Maybe her family didn't want one. Neville Chamberlain, the British Conservative Prime Minister from 1937 to 1940, was cremated here, but his ashes were taken to Westminster Abbey. Ian Dury, the singer known for Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick, was cremated here, but his ashes are scattered in the Thames. There is a memorial bench in Richmond Park for him. And the Anglo-American poet T.S. Eliot, famous for The Wastelands, among so many other important poems, he was cremated here, but his ashes are in St. Michael's Church in East Coker in Somerset. Rudyard Kipling was cremated here, the poet and author, famously of The Jungle Book and so many others, but his ashes also removed to Westminster Abbey, to Poets' Corner. Kit Lambert, who I'm going to be talking about when I tour Brompton Cemetery very soon, he died very young, and he was the manager and record producer for The Who. Got some synergy there with Keith Moon. He was cremated here, but his ashes are at Brompton. Vivien Leigh, the English actress from Gone with the Wind. She was cremated here, but her ashes were scattered on the lake at Tickeridge Mill in Sussex. Charles Rennie Mackintosh, the Scottish Art Nouveau architect and artist, was cremated here, but his ashes were scattered at sea in France. Peter O'Toole was cremated here in a wicker coffin in 2013, with his ashes later scattered in Connemara, Ireland. Ellen Terry, the 19th century actress. I love looking at the paintings of her in the National Portrait Gallery. Though she was cremated here, her ashes are kept at St. Paul's in Covent Garden, not St. Paul's Cathedral. St. Paul's in Covent Garden is often referred to as the Actors' Church. H.G. Wells, the science fiction author, was cremated here, but his ashes were scattered at sea. And I'm sure there are so many other important, famous, notable, and just loved people that I could mention. Well, that's the end of our tour. It ended up being a really special one for me, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Feels strange to be kind of giddy and gleeful in a place of such solemnity, but I hope that my respect has also come through. I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum.